Well, hello MGTOW. Welcome back. Welcome to my channel. Today, I want to talk about traditionalism and the way in which the MGTOW community has been infiltrated by traditionalist beliefs and ideas, and the people that harbor those ideas. It turns out that feminism, being the result or the pushback against a more traditionalist system of putting together a family, right? In fact, the whole concept of a family came into question as a result of the feminist ideas that took hold since the beginning of the last century. And so we began to see how feminism itself brought a whole new plethora of problems to society, right? Traditionalism was not perfect to begin with. The women that formed part of a traditionalist system felt stuck. Many of them felt as though they spent too much time in the house. They were imprisoned in their homes. They felt as though they did not have economic opportunities or the same economic opportunities that men had. They also felt that they should have had the right to pursue a career, if that, instead of being a mother, if that's what they chose to do. So there were many issues with traditionalism, even when the women formed part of a family of a family that was a loving family, a husband that took care of them and loved them, right? So I'm not saying this here because I'm a feminist by any stretch of the imagination. I am not. But when you listen to my words, when you come to my channel, I hope that the message that you leave with is a message of freedom for all parties involved. A while back I published a video, or rather posted a video, having to do with animal domestication. And this video, needless to say, was not popular. In the video I talked about how this idea of animal domestication was kind of a double-edged sword, in which we ended up enslaving the animals for our amusement, and as a result we ended up enslaving ourselves. Again, needless to say, this wasn't a popular idea. One MGTOW content producer even kind of ridiculed the idea in his channel. But it's central to everything that I've done here in this small channel of mine. Everything I do is centered on the freedom of man, with the recognition that if we don't let others be free, we cannot be free ourselves. If we do not let the women be who they want to be, even if they want to be degenerates, like I said in my last video, right? If we do not let others live, we cannot live freely ourselves. And so, I know this is more of a mellow video, more of a mellow message, right, than the previous one. But hopefully it carries the same weight. when I talk about MGTOW and the tenets of the philosophy, no marriage, no cohabitation, no kids, what I'm talking about is the freedom of man. I have this vision that one day men, and especially young men, will have the opportunity to dream, accomplish, and be as free as they wish to be without having to burden themselves with having to carry the finances of a family. You see? That is what MGTOW is about. It's about not allowing someone else to be a barnacle on you. And it doesn't matter if whoever's trying to attach themselves to you is a man or a woman or a family member or a friend or you name it. The underlying ideas of MGTOW, the underlying principles of MGTOW dictate that a man should be able to say, to tell for himself what his destiny is going to be. That is why there is a connection between MGTOW and classical liberalism, or MGTOW and what's come to be known as Libertarianism. There are, of course, some MGTOW content producers that tend to lean politically towards the left. But all in all, the idea of individual freedom is what drives this philosophy. And so, again, one of the reasons that's the first reason why I believe that the traditionalist ideas, right, are so dangerous to the MGTOW philosophy. It's because the traditionalists tend to be geared towards the unification of a family as we used to know it, where the woman is dependent on the man. And you hear these guys say things like, she's better off. This is what they'll say. They'll say she's better off at home raising the kids. They'll say her body was not meant for work. They'll say things like, she's not, you'll never see a 60-year-old woman working construction, right? Or they'll say things like, it's, in the eyes of God, man is on top of the woman, and the woman is, man is the head of the household, and followed by the woman, and then the children, and finally the dog, I guess, or whatever. So these guys have their plan, the plan of the traditionalists, is to wait for the system to collapse, for the feminist system to collapse, and then they step in and they say, well, you know what, I told you so. You're better off coming back to the kitchen. See, you shouldn't have left the kitchen in the first place. MGTOW is not that. MGTOW is about saying, well, you know what, you want your freedom, woman, I respect that. And in the process of you acquiring your freedom, right, I gain much more freedom than you ever did, because you depended on me for your quality of life. And I was lucky enough to be raised in a traditionalist Hispanic family. Father sat at the head of the table. Mother prepared lunch and dinner, as well as breakfast, but usually breakfast was more of a light meal. Dad worked outside the home, and our mother stayed at home and raised us. That is up until the time when I came to the United States, in which circumstances in life forced me to be a little bit more self-reliant. But us children went to school, and our mother brought us lunch, and it was, and most families were like that, right? But and it was a very stable system. But the other reason why I believe that the traditionalist system will not work in the future is because the circumstances surrounding what could be a traditional family simply do not exist anymore. We have an economy that has changed dramatically, and hence my second point. There's a connection between an economic system, that is, there's a connection between the way in which we produce and distribute resources and the way in which a family is structured, or this idea of family, the way this idea of a family takes place. There's a connection between those two things. Prior to the Industrial Revolution, people lived in very small communities, right? And families were more open, meaning there were more participants. The family was somewhat extended. In fact, in some traditionalist settings, the bed is shared. That is the sleeping, the surface in which people sleep, right? I'm not talking about sexual relations here or intimacy. I'm talking about the surface in which people sleep is shared, not just by the head of household, being the father and the mother, but the kids also sleep in that same bed, and often enough other family members as well. So prior to the Industrial Revolution, many families were extended in such a way in which a woman had a kid, and the kid sort of belonged to the community, where everyone pitched in and tried to help, and helped her out and carried the baby, and some women even breastfed the children of other women. Back then we had people had the luxury of being able to do that. Now, because of health reasons, of course, that's it's not as popular anymore. But that's the way it was. Then, of course, industrialization came along, right? And people began to become more secular as well, and families became smaller because the economic system dictated the way in which that family was to be structured. The father went to work in a factory setting. He was no longer available for children to come by and spend time with him at work. In fact, these children were pushed onto an emerging educational system, which was geared toward the crafting of a human being that would be able to sustain himself in an economic system that demanded a more skilled labor force. And so that physical separation of the family, throughout the space of a day and the time of a day, took place. And so, but time evolved, right? And women, after World War II, after being allowed to participate in the production and in the distribution process, right? The distribution of resources, the process of the distribution of resources, they had a taste of the same freedom. Perhaps a more, I should say, in a softer industrial setting, right? An industrial setting that had already been changed and it had been softened by advances in technology, right? Where children were not participating in it, for 17 hours a day or so, right? The women entered this new labor force, still in the Industrial Revolution, the stages of but the last stage of the Industrial Revolution, right? they entered the workforce in massive amounts of numbers, right? Huge numbers. But they had a taste of that freedom, the freedom that comes from being able to produce for yourself, right? Self-reliant, to be self-reliant. And women have that same desire, just like we do. We all want to be self-reliant, at least most of us anyways. Some people are, Machiavellian in nature, and they believe that they're better off manipulating others to get what they want. But even them, they look at that Machiavellian way of doing things as their self-reliance. But to make a long story short, the women enjoyed being able to produce and being able to be rewarded for their labors as much as anyone else did. And this led to the more advanced stages of feminism, and subsequently to what we have today, which is a stage of feminism that came about as the result of this last shift in the way in which we produce and distribute resources. And what I'm talking about here is, of course, the revolution in information technology. We had this new way of putting wealth together, right? This new way of generating wealth, and some women were able to participate in this process, right? And it was mostly men who built fantastic fortunes as a result of it, but women as well. There have been some women that have joined the information-based technology. The information-based economy, and as a result, are able to produce for themselves and their families, as limited and as strange as those families may seem to us today, because they're not traditional families where the man is present, right? But they're able to produce for those families, right? And as well as for themselves. And many of them are able to produce much more than some men that have not adapted to this new system of generation of wealth. And so it's going to be, so to reiterate my point here, with every shift in the process of wealth generation, we are going to and wealth distribution, we are going to have a shift in the way in which we look at families, the way in which we perceive what a family is, which leads me to my last point. My last point is that the traditionalist revenge, and I do call it that, this traditionalist revenge is not ever going to materialize. And the reason why it's not going to materialize is because we live in a much more complex, much more interconnected world than we ever did, thanks to this information, this plethora of information that's out there, right? And for a man to say that, a woman should not be educated, right? That she should be, just dedicating herself to family and children. It's, in my opinion, a pretty obsolete way of looking at, some of the, what is, it's just no longer there, guys. It's just no longer there. It's an obsolete way of perceiving women. Education is key. It makes no sense to deny someone else the right to an education. Now, does an education in, say, classic literature like English, or art history, or political science, does that education have the same amount of value to the marketplace as, say, an engineering degree? Of course not. Of course not. But You know, I don't know about other men, but I find that women who have a certain degree of education are much more attractive than those that do not have any education at all. And this translates to, you know, even little things like, you know, manners when they sit at the table, right? And you take a woman to a fine dining establishment, and if she's educated, right, if she has a certain degree of education, and I don't mean degrees that are, you know, granted by universities, although that's you know, let's talk about formal schooling. Okay, if she's being formally schooled, then, you know, we can expect this woman to behave in certain ways. We can expect her to be, number one, more tolerant, because education tends to make people more tolerant. Number two, we can expect her to be more open-minded. And this is an effect that education has not just on men, but also on women. It makes people more tolerant. It makes people more open-minded. She may also be more inquisitive and less self-centered. So I find that for a man at this stage of the game to say that, you know, a woman doesn't benefit from obtaining an education is just an obsolete idea. I think we should just toss it. It goes against the philosophy of MGTOW. It's a traditionalist idea that is, you know, whose time has come to pass, and we got to move on to new things. So and the other thing is that, like I said before, we live in a very interconnected place. Society is not as simple as saying, you know, let's take women's rights away, right? How do you take women's rights away? Well, you just take them away, right? We can't just do that, right? Because there are always going to be, you know, alliances. There are going to be people who think, you know, very different than we do. So for us to come out here and say, you know, we just take women's rights away, I mean, who's going to look at their mother and say, mother, you know, you don't deserve the rights, you know, you don't deserve the rights you have. I'm gonna do what I'm gonna do to take them away, right? Very few men are going to do that, and so we have to. I don't advocate it. Okay, I don't condone this sort of thinking. I think it's anti-MGTOW. It goes against the philosophy of MGTOW, and I think that what we need, instead of a traditionalist system, is we need a new system, a system that is better suited for what it is that this new economy has brought to the fore. Now, it's not the job of men who have gone their own way to bring about these changes and to discover what works in this new economic system, you know, in relation to the way in which families are structured. It's not our job to put it all together, simply because as MGTOWs, what we have done is we have said, well, you know what, things are messy and we are just going to walk away. We're going to walk away, and this is a problem reserved for the people that still have the desire to be part of a family sometime in their future. Anyways, MGTOW, I thank you for listening to this video. I hope you have learned something today. And if you enjoyed it, and you feel as though, you know, it has value, please consider subscribing. I'm never gonna ask you for a penny. I don't do this for money. I do this because I want to bring about the freedom of man. And one last thought. There are guys out there that have called me a monster. They've called me a monster, and they said that I'm against life and against everything simply because I am, I have expressed openly that I adhere to a secularist philosophy. But these are the very same guys that are advocating the return to a traditionalist system. And they're lurking in the shadows, waiting for feminism to fail so they can go back there. As senile as they are, they're waiting to go back and tell the women, you know, all your effort was in vain. Come back to the kitchen and take your shoes off. That is not MGTOW. That is not us. Thank you for watching. I'll catch you in the next video.